It has been a relatively short journey these last 7 months. We sit currently at 3,600 subscribers. I've been lucky, fortunate. I've been told by hundreds of you I deserve it, and yet I know I only have you to thank for the success I have. Today we revisit the first ever video that was on this channel. We go back to redo, with better quality and sound and music and editing, the very first video I ever posted. For my fans who have been here since the first video, this is for you. For those who are just finding me, join us for the ride. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more narrative HOI4 content. Without further ado, the Kaiser rises. Germany in 2020, the industrial juggernaut. An economic titan, a full trillion in GDP above any of their European friends. Germany has some of, if not, the most recognizable brands in the world. Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, Adidas, Hugo Boss. Germany is the economic titan of the European Union, having made itself the center of the economic union by sheer success alone. Germany has a long and storied history as having been the economic center of Europe, if you consider long to be about the last 2 centuries. It all began in 1815 with the Treaty of Vienna. A replacement for the Holy Roman Empire was envisioned and created after the forces of Napoleon Bonaparte dismantled the HRE in 1806. The German Confederation, an entity in which Prussia and Austria were the main military powers, was created by the treaty, and Prussia took a leading role in the following decades as the economic and military defender of the Confederation, moving against Denmark in the 1864 Prusso-Danish War, where Schleswig-Holstein was acquired, a territory of the Confederation that laid outside of German hands. Prussia would go on to then solidify its control over Germany just 2 years later by attacking Austria with Italian aid in the 1866 Brothers' War. The Catholic nations of Hanover, Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, and other minor states fought with Austria against the Kingdom of Prussia and her Protestant coalition. The loss against Italy and Prussia led Italy to gain Venice, while Prussia formed the North German Confederation, linking their lands in the Rhine with mainland Prussia. It was during the 1840s, 50s, and 60s that Germany rapidly developed its military doctrines and industrialization under Prussian direction, with focus on Brandenburg and the Rhineland. The Rhine soon became home to Europe's largest concentration of industry, growing the cottage economy into a true workplace economy. It is no accident that during this period, communism appeared in Germany, also in the Rhine, with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels publishing the Communist Manifesto. Prussia understood the modern reality of warfare by the standards of 1870. Artillery, maneuverability, and discipline were the 3 make-it-or-break-its of strategy and tactics, and industry and conscription allowed for all of these things to be utilized to a great degree. Conscription has existed for millennia, but mandatory service is a recent invention from the last few centuries. To have a standing army with a massive reserve is something that few historical matches prior to the modern Prussian adoption of the system exist. Many nations would follow in their footsteps in designing a conscription system that requires 1 or 2 years' service. The 1871 war was the true show of force and progress. The Germans had always been divided while France was united. Not even a full century prior, the Bonapartists handed Prussia their own ass in a series of engagements across a decade, and now Prussia, with updated doctrines, again became the god of war. Prussia used their breech-loading Krupp guns and small units tactics to overwhelm the French on both number and firepower. Such was the ass-whooping France received that l'Empereur reportedly wrote, while encircled in Sedan, that he stood on the hill in the open facing Prussian forces, hoping a stray Krupp gun would end his reign swiftly, and Japan entirely changed their military doctrine from the French one to following the system of Prussian drill in reaction to this defeat. The declaration of the German Empire upset the European balance. France, always a power on the land, contesting British control globally, became a footnote like Spain, while Italy and Germany became brand new up-and-comers, previously considered non-issues beyond their regions. The rule of Wilhelm I of Germany was largely not his own. Bismarck guided Prussia into forming the empire, and he guided their foreign policy in keeping an alliance with Russia and Austria, forming a grand European land bloc. While Bismarck personally shirked the idea of colonies, Berlin still hosted the European Colonial Conference, dividing up Africa and other areas between various European powers. The turn of the century saw things sour. While things had been looking up, continued advancements in technology and doctrine made the prospect of another war possible, as nationalism continued to rise and the Balkan powder keg became inevitable to pop. Wilhelm II put the power back in the monarchy when his reign began. He tried to challenge Britain at sea and Russia on land. He put more stake in Italy and Austria than into the pact with Russia, and he fired Bismarck. We all know what occurred in World War I and in World War II. The Prussian monarchy set Germany on a course for greatness. Their militarism and industrial forethought led them to found one of the largest railway systems in Europe decades before other nations did the same. But the world wars killed nearly everything that made Prussia Prussian. Militarism, the Junker aristocracy, nationalism. Germany has maintained one thing from the period: industry, economic forethought and knowledge, and the modern democratic interpretations of Marx's works. The workers' paradise ideal, formed in conjunction with the SPD and CDU. It was the dream of the Social Partei Deutschland to establish a workers' paradise in the democratic system of West Germany. East Germany had their own plans for a workers' paradise, and it ended with 1 in 10 people indirectly or directly working for state intelligence. Needless to say, that became a worker's nightmare for most. West Germany, on the other hand, found great economic success in the fallout of the war. What is it they say? When you hit rock bottom, you can only go up. From their capital in Bonn, Adenauer and his successors led Germany to economic prosperity. The Rhine became an integral part of not just German, but European supply chains, as the European Coal and Steel Association was founded, and Germany became perhaps the largest contributor of both resources. Adenauer believed in the spirit of evil Prussia, and he saw himself a determined exorcist. Under the rule of the CDU and SPD, the West German army stayed under half the size of the East German army for most of the Cold War, relying on their allies like America in order to protect them. Despite technological innovations and a few insane defense ministers, West Germany successfully killed the evil Prussian spirit in the hearts of the people. The spirit of Germany was replaced, or rewritten, by that of the business-minded Swabians and Rhinelanders, and the peace and beer-loving Bavarians. All while East Germany tried to maintain militaristic tradition while tearing other elements out. The Lutheran Church in Germany is greatly diminished today, and the majority denomination in the modern East German territory is now atheism, a gray block in what a sea of yellow and blue used to be. By the time of German unity in 1990, Germany was the greatest European economy already. They stood down the East German army, disarming them, and began a form of regulated shock therapy on the East, where the state companies, records, and many other assets of East Germany were handed to a specialized bureau that managed the sale of seized assets. The East has remained a holdout of older traditions, even when largely absent of religion. It is poorer, and thus provides a higher number of military men. The largest amounts of left and right-wing extremists hail from the East. This is no mistake. For many, the overregulation of the German economy has seen suffocation for small businesses, especially those in East Germany, as West German companies bleed into the East with impunity. The CDU, SPD, long have they held the status quo, but increasingly, the FDP, the Freie Demokratische Partei, has gained popularity. Their policy of economic liberalism and conservative social values has garnered popularity with many who feel the AfD is too radical, and that the CDU increasingly doesn't stand for conservative values. In the 2017 elections, the FDP got perhaps its best result ever at 10.7% of the vote. Talks with the CDU of Merkel over forming a Jamaica coalition between the CDU, Greens, and the FDP fell apart over immigration policy. Merkel adopted a coalition with the SPD once again, a common fixture of German politics. But in 2021's elections, following a harsh response to the pandemic, the fall of the United States in the Civil War, and the collapse of Saudi Arabia, it became clear that the highly regulated immigration loose center would not hold. And the CDU, clocking 23% of the vote, the SPD clocking 18%, and the FDP clocking an insane 21%, the party's greatest performance ever. A Deutschland coalition, Schwarz, Rot, Gold, was formed. The FDP forced the CDU to adopt a tougher stance on immigration, cutting the flow of Saudi migrants. Chancellor Armin Laschet, now having to follow in the footsteps of the retired Angela Merkel, had big shoes to fill. Christian Lindner is appointed economic minister from the FDP. The chancellor, under pressure from the party and his constituents, works closely with the liberal economic and right social policies of the FDP. The SPD declines further in popularity as it remains a part of the coalition, with Die Linke increasingly taking up their voter base in the polls. After the economic crash of 2021, the CDU and FDP worked out a deficit spending plan to prop up many industries, including shipping, automobile, and aeronautical industries. While it isn't in character for the FDP to spend government funds, the FDP believed the subsidies were necessary to keep businesses afloat. Christian Lindner, leading the FDP onwards, maintained and greatly expanded their grasp on the polls, while the CDU recuperated its losses, having taken a strong anti-migrant stance in reaction to the AfD surge in the 2021 elections. The AfD has began to dissipate in the polls. Their leader, Ms. Wedel, an economic liberal herself, has no policy that the CDU or FDP do not cover. Russia, heavily affected by COVID, saw their leader suddenly perish at the hands of the dreaded plague. With Putin gone, Gennady Zhuganov and Yuri Afonin, the Red Spectres, secured a majority of the vote, edging out Medvedev and Zhirinovsky. Having taken control of Russia, the CPRF immediately began to restructure the system, bringing back many elements of the Soviet administration and working to consolidate the political and military apparatus under their control. It appeared that the Red Menace had returned, and this only further hurt the popularity of the political left in Germany. People in Germany were afraid of the resurgence of a Soviet Union in a world without America. They were largely without protection. During the period of economic collapse, Belgium fell in on itself, and the Netherlands, France, and we all got a piece of Belgium. We acquired the small strip of Eupen-Malmedy, a small and insignificant territory lost after World War I, but at the time it was very economically important. A territory which, while small, formed a significant part of Germany's coal supply and was important for German industrialization in the late 19th century. Its return is a popular thing, boosting the administration's view among the public during crisis. The FDP proposed an economic plan to be implemented in Q1 of 2023 to massively expand the German arms industries by supplying them large government subsidies and tax cuts. This coincided with a remilitarization plan proposed by Christian Lindner, proposing up to 4% of the GDP to be placed into the military and for total Army personnel to be raised in excess of 200,000. A new upgrade package for the Leopard 2 was pushed, with new sensors and wiring, and the Bundeswehr placed mass orders to Rheinmetall and various other vehicle makers to put into production vast quantities of Lynx reconnaissance vehicles, Marder IFVs, and Leopard 2 tanks. The rearmament was placed under the view of General Rossmaneth, whose vision involved the increase of mechanization and armored forces as the main component of the Bundeswehr, favoring quality over quantity. The military-industrial complex was founded by the FDP and CDU's combined effort, and the tax cuts and militarization was the last straw for the SPD. In early 2025, the SPD breaks out of the coalition with the CDU and the FDP, leaving Germany under the control of a minority government, the Habsburg Coalition, CDU black and FDP yellow. The two center-right-wing forces sit just under the threshold for a majority. The 2025 federal elections come, and the successful response to the stock market crash through liberal policy and deregulation led the CDU to 31% of the vote and 24% to FDP. With a combined 55%, the Habsburg Coalition wins. With the 2025 victory securing another 5 years of CDU-FDP rule, the system is further deregulated, just as Christian Lindner is preparing yet another spat of cuts and deregulations. The Soviets begin to make their move. One of the largest obstacles to remilitarization has been a low support for it. People wanted something to be done about the Soviets. Sanctions were applied, but no one wanted to fight the Soviets. More recruits slowly trickled in, but economic and political mobilization was slower than hoped. There was no shortage of vehicles. The vehicles for the proposed remilitarization had been produced, shy a few hundred Leopards, but the soldiers were not there to fill the shoes. The Soviet invasion of Central Asia was a turning point for the Habsburg Coalition and for Germany, but what really did it was the death of the Schultz family in Armenia, where Franz and Louise Schultz and their 2 kids were killed by Soviet forces while entering Yerevan, where the family was vacationing. These German citizens' deaths turned up the heat. Germany was angry. The Schultz family lit the flame. Several 100,000 volunteers trickled in the following month. Meanwhile, the German left called for tolerance. Die Linke and the SPD tried to fetter anti-Russian demonstrations, but it didn't matter. In fact, it hurt their approval. Several Russian citizens were lynched in Berlin when a Dritte Weg parade tore through the city with batons. 2025 was a year of fear for the Habsburg Coalition because, yes, they're finally meeting their mobilization goal, but the people were rapidly radicalizing against the Soviets and the left wing in their own country, and it was partially their own fault. The FDP were mixed about the radicalization, some saying anti-communist fervor was welcome, some saying it was worrying. The CDU-CSU generally could agree it was worrying. The BFV was called up by Chancellor Lachette and instructed to target right-wing demonstrations, breaking them up and gathering evidence to ban them. The AfD, now having adopted a nationalist platform, stood with Die Heimat and Dritte Weg against the BFV's attempt to ban all of them amid recent rioting from their members. The court proceedings went ahead anyways, and the court of public opinion in Germany tore apart the Habsburg Coalition. This was only 1 year into a 5-year term, however. Lachette and Lindner were sweating, but far more about the Soviet forces building up on Ukraine's border. As protests intensified, Germany mobilized the Bundeswehr and began preparing its reserve forces. Thousands of martyrs and leopards moved across Poland into the Baltic along Ukraine. The German people quieted down, but Die Linke continued anti-war agitations, which Die Heimat met with counter-protests in many cities. All in all, a quiet had settled along the NATO border with the Soviet government. President Zelensky asked for guarantees of aid, and NATO only said they needed a month to prepare. As Soviet forces enter Ukraine, NATO rallied. The defense of the German way of life was at stake. Freiheit was threatened, and the ways of liberalism threatened. The very church itself threatened by the Soviets. We could not let them win. We had to stop them, for Europe and for liberty. Our forces were tasked with holding the Baltic states, and that they did well. But our allies completely failed us on the southern half of the front. Romania was broken into, Bucharest seized. It seemed the entire Balkan branch of NATO was at risk of being overran, and we'd now have to relocate our forces from our Baltic positions just to stop the whole line from collapsing. Despite our best efforts to hold Hungary, we had to pull out and make a last-ditch effort to hold on to Bratislava and westernmost Poland. Even though we had already lost Warsaw, there was hope to get it back in one final, desperate offensive by our armor. Though we made some promising gains, we were stopped short of Warsaw. There was no more hope. Soviet forces had landed near Copenhagen in an attempt to push us over the edge. And so, we had to surrender, having no other choice. Our defeat in Eastern Europe saw many turn away from their governments. The Habsburg coalition, once a sign of economic prosperity and center-right renewal in Germany, became a sign of the center's failures and of the failures of free market capitalism. Germany was too weak to defend itself and its allies spiritually. It had lost its militarism, and the people knew this. The people loathed this. Dritte Weg and Die Heimat have their ideologies, but Strasserism and Nazism cannot rebuild the nation in the manner that the German people desired. Germans do not want strong economic control. They do not want every facet of their life watched over. They do not desire a return to the dictatorship of the 40s, but they desire change. The Radelsführer, a purposefully unknown and vague figure, led a military coup dubbed Day X, seizing control of the German government and tossing the FDP and CDU into the bin. The Bundestag became a military palace, and the Radelsführer prepared to remilitarize German society. Minister-President Soder of the CSU, a Bavarian regional party, allied to the CDU, broke away Bavaria and asked for Austrian protection, who granted it. The Bundeswehr, under the command of the junta, quickly responded, overwhelming the last holdout of the Republic and collecting Austria with it, securing Germany, all of Germany, under the junta for the foreseeable future. After months, even a year, of militarization, increasingly radical economic reform, a movement began to grow around one man, not the Radelsführer, no, but a man that inspired even the Radelsführer. The Radelsführer saw in him the future of Germany. The Reichsbürgers ascended from the depths of the German sovereign citizen movement. They are an assortment of peoples from varying organizations loosely related, of whom deny the legitimacy of the Federal Republic of Germany. Their leader, by most accounts, is the old noble, Heinrich XIII of House Rus. Heinrich is an outcast within his own family, the claimed head of the family, but very seldom does his family follow his actions. Nevertheless, the Rattlesführer had spoken to the Hohenzollerns already about possibly restoring their throne, but Georg Friedrich wanted no part of it. Heinrich of Rus provided a prestigious option. The Rattlesführer was poised to meet with this Heinrich. The conversation went well, showing both had similar goals, and Heinrich had a plan for reforming the civilian government, which made the Rattlesführer relax. The Reichsbürgers had thought out their plans and intended to restore the Imperial German system of 1871. In a grand speech to tens of thousands of onlookers in Berlin, the Rattlesführer spoke.
Männer und Frauen Deutschlands, heute ist der Tag der nationalen Erlösung. 100 Jahre und Rex in der Oberdeutschland herunterbrochen, seit die Rechtmagenherrscher vom Thron gerissen wurden. Die Republik korruptiert die Hohenzollern und sie weigerten sich zu herrschen. Sie weigerten sich. Doch wir haben einen wahren Kandidaten gefunden. Einen wahren Kaiser aus einem Stolzenkrieg aus Preußens, Heinrich von Rus. Niemals haben wir besser Seiten erlebt, als waren der Kaiserzeit. Wir waren für ein kaiserliches Volk. Wir großer und wir Werder. So gedemutigt. Der große Kronen markiert nicht der Beginn einer neuen Ära. Das wird Reich, sondern der Hochseher für unsere Geschichte und Tradition. Es liebe der Kaiser, es liebe unser Kriegergeist.
And so, Rus was crowned in a glorious ceremony preceded by a military parade. But what really gives the new Kaiser the right to rule? Where does he come from? Heinrich XIII is, of course, the 13th Heinrich of his name in House Rus. Kind of. They are an ancient house dating back 1,000 years to the year 1090, with their origins in the quaint yet historically important state of Thuringia. Erkenbert I founded the Rus family, and after him was Erkenbert II, but from the third generation onwards, every single male was named Henry, or in German, Heinrich, after Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor who granted the Rus family the regions of Vida and Gera. Henry III, IV, and V split the three regions of Rus, that being Vida, Gera, and Kreis, with Henry III abdicating to join the Teutonic Order. Henry the Russian, ruling after the split, was said to be the originator of the Rus surname. Therefore, the House of Rus is likely a translation of Rus. The Rus had many prestigious positions for their small holdings, obtaining rulership over Meissen for a time, and in 1530s being granted the High Chancellery of Bohemia by way of Henry IV of Plauen, who was involved in several wars, eventually dying in a battle in 1554 during the siege of Plassenburg. During the Napoleonic Wars, another Henry XIII was a field marshal for Austria and a close friend of Emperor Joseph II. The two branches of Rus Kreis and Rus Gera were divided politically and religiously, some serving Prussia valiantly, some serving Austria valiantly. During the Brothers' War of 1866, one branch of Rus would be forced to surrender, and became a vehement opponent from within the empire until 1902, when their ruler, Henry XXII, passed. His daughter Hermione would go on to marry Wilhelm II von Hohenzollern in 1922, despite his views. In the era of the German Confederation, it was once suggested that a hereditary emperor should be placed on the top of the Confederation, Many Germans, well, they spoke on who it would be. Most opposed Prussian rule over all of Germany. In fact, a Saxon noble, Prince John of Saxony, remarked that if the 9 electors were restored today, the Prince of Rus had better chance of being emperor than the King of Prussia. The influence of the small principalities of Rus were felt all over Germany and its neighboring nations. In Bohemia, Denmark, and especially the Netherlands, where they very nearly succeeded Queen Wilhelmina to rule the Netherlands. Their hilarious naming convention demands that every man be named Heinrich, and that they be named until the number reaches 100 and then the count is restarted. This leads to some insanely named figures with titles such as Heinrich the 72nd. In many ways, the warriors and smart businessmen of the Rus went the way of Germany. With no more monarchies to serve, they kept what wealth they could and continued on as businessmen. Briefly, a member of House Rus supported the Nazi Party, but the NKVD captured him in 1945, and ironically, he was very likely killed in Buchenwald, although we have no idea for sure. So these Rus guys have all the credentials of a German royal house. Nazi sympathies, questionable actions, a really unique naming system. Seems qualified. I think, yeah. Seems qualified to me. Kaiser Heinrich, we'll stop calling them by numbers from now on, has very traditionalist monarchist views, perhaps maybe even regressive monarchist views. It is his opinion that the overthrow of monarchies in France, Germany, and Italy were in the pursuit of corporate interests within foreign powers who wanted to establish an exploitative system that has been no benefit to the people. It is a classical school of monarchist thought, but the anti-Semitic part isn't necessarily classical. Maybe it is. You know, it used to be really common, huh? The mind of the monarchist believes the sovereign acts like a vanguard with absolute authority, protecting their people against foreign or domestic exploitation, often using their own wealth to fund public projects as opposed to public wealth, and using low taxation. Good Kaiser Heinrich is a firm believer in incredibly low taxes, at least by modern standards, reflecting the policy used by the principalities of Rus. A 10% flat tax rate. In the words of the Kaiser, 10% lets the people of Rus live happy lives because it is straightforward and transparent. When comparing his ideal government with that of the European Union or the Federal Republic he has now replaced, he says the formers were distant and inaccessible forms of government when compared to a sovereign prince. Nothing is, in his mind, more personal than an absolute sovereign. For all intensive purposes, while Kaiser Heinrich was propped up by ultranationalists, fascists, and ultramilitarists, Heinrich's one and only marriage was to an Iranian woman, which has since ended. His reign is unlikely to take on a character of white or Germanic supremacy, but undoubtedly will become an autocratic state, and a vehemently anti-Semitic one. The Rus Kaiser will rule with a velvet fist in an iron glove. The Rattlesführer steps back into a military role, leaving politics to the Kaiser. The restoration of many dynastic rights and titles throughout Germany led to Germany increasingly under the Kaiser's direction, decentralizing his authority somewhat, all as a part of his agrarian economic programs. The Wettins are restored to Saxony, the Hohenzollerns despite past enmity in Brandenburg, though Berlin is maintained as an imperial city under direct imperial rule. The Kaiser takes all of Thuringia as a personal domain, the House of Mecklenburg-Schwerin is placed back in Mecklenburg, and the Wittelbachs restored to Bavaria. In Baden-Württemberg, the House of Urach makes its return, and the House of Hesse, unsurprisingly, taking residence in Hesse. Schleswig-Holstein is given to the House of Holstein-Gottorp, whose head, Nicholas III, also strangely claims the throne of Russia. The Rhineland, forming an industrial core of Germany and given to Prussia in the 1815 Treaty of Vienna, is seen by Kaiser Heinrich as rightful territory of the imperial seat, and is added to the personal titles of the emperor, alongside Thuringia. Hanover goes to who else but Ernst August von Hanover, and of course the Austrian throne is handed to a current Habsburg. A firm believer in divine right, divinity has been restored to Germany and local governance. This pseudo-federation is still under the absolute reign of Heinrich, and yet it provides a considerable amount of regional autonomy. Many of the princes assigned are not so authoritarian-minded, at least on a local level. People pay low taxes and have relaxed leadership. The reign of the Kaiser is only interrupted by two things. To bluntly describe cameralism, it is a German form of centrist economic policy mainly practiced by absolute monarchs in which the total resources of the state are used almost solely for state benefit. Rural markets, local production, and a completely nationalized military industry, along with a complete dismantling of the Judeo-globalist banking system, all part of some chimera of state capitalism and local-level liberalism that outside observers simply call Reichsbürger economics. Civilian industries are retooled for military production all across the nation, and a mandatory 2-year service is introduced. This mandatory service will be a permanent measure, as it teaches skills to the nation's young adults and allows the nation the ability to grow a military of great size and strength at any given moment. The Soviets, sensing they will have to fight us again in time, push their frontier further west into Yugoslavia to create a smaller border. This was almost enough to ignite the powder keg, but another year passed and we too made a move to consolidate our position, launching Operation Fall Johann, a 3-pronged attack to rapidly knock out Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. More than likely this will spark Soviet intervention into Finland, but this is an acceptable price. The ultranationalists, fascists, and the Kaiser, all allied together, stand as one under the Pact of Steel against the Bolshevik menace. But there are some final preparations that must be taken. The German Air Force, and frankly the Air Force of the entire Pact of Steel, is very small. Well, Germany does have a couple years before their war plan is meant to take effect, and they're going to use that time to mass-produce attack helicopters and a brand new upgraded F-35 chassis that they've nicknamed Helga. Now, of course, I could say that that's because of mythology. Everybody knows that in Norse mythology, Helga is a protector, a holy defender. And what is a fighter plane but a defender for the ground troops? But I also have a friend named Helga, so there's that too. Either way, I'm shitting out like 1,000 of these. I'm shitting out so many fucking planes. No one else has planes. It's just me. With nothing left to do except storm east, Germany must storm east and reclaim Brest-Litovsk and beyond, to save Europe, to save Germany, to save all godly nations. For the initial phase of the war, we have to take out the buffer states between us and the Warsaw Pact. The Western Polish Republic and the Czech Republic are the only obstacles that stand between us and the great European plain that we can use to tear open the Soviet front. But we cannot underestimate the Balkans either. They will be harsh, hard to take. The mountains will certainly make things difficult for our predominantly armored force. As a part of Unternehmen Huss, we are invading through Hungary in an attempt to try and cut the Soviet forces in half. The idea is that if we get a sufficient enough breakthrough, we can continue through all the way to Odessa and cut off the Balkans. However, the mountainous terrain of Slovakia might complicate things if Soviet forces prove to be in too high of a concentration in Hungary, which it looks like they are. Unternehmen Huss is a failure. We could not secure Budapest despite our attempt. However, there is a much more prime target. It just means we'll have to go the long way around the Balkans instead. Launching Unternehmen Michael, we will go straight through Poland, curve up to the Baltic states, and try to seize Leningrad before their forces can rearrange themselves. We tried to blitz Russia once, and it didn't go so well, but this is the modern day. Unternehmen Michael went far better than expected. It seems like we overran much of the northern forces of the Soviet Union because their north is wide open, but we cannot risk any further overextension. We need to push south and clean up the Balkan front before we can push deeper into Russia proper. Rapidly assembling Unternehmen Norse, we will follow the footsteps of the Varangians and go down the river, seizing Kiev and going down to take Odessa, cutting the Balkan front off from the main Soviet front, enabling us to clean up the Balkan and focus our entire force at storming into Siberia. All our attacks have been wildly successful up to now, and now, with Soviet forces largely diminished, it's time to enact Fall Rot.
Was ich noch erkläre, hat sicher längst gespürt. Wenn ich mich dagegen wehre, ahn ich doch, wohin das führt. Jeder muss sich selbst erkennen, hoffentlich versteht er das. Denn ich will mich von ihm trennen.
With victory in the east, Germany and Italy look on their gains, pleased. But France gained little to nothing out of the war, the same with Spain and Britain. We restored the Hohenzollerns to rightful rule in Romania, the Wettins to Poland, the Uraks to Lithuania. We restored monarchy to Ukraine, to Belarus, the United Baltic Duchy stands tall in our name, but these gains in Holy Russia itself are all ours to behold. The pact of steel feels blunted. Only Italy was given claims it feels are to its credit. The Balkans, Dalmatia, Greater Albania, Montenegro, but still the fascists press the king to push for Corsica, for Nizza, for Libya even. France fears that we are growing too powerful, and without being contained, we will use the resources of the East to conquer the West. Their fears are founded. With Italy at our side, though regrettable, we must fight the House of Windsor and their anti-royal friends. Divine right to rule beats the fascists any day. We will take back Alsace. We will absorb the lowlands. We will make Britain see the light. And we will avenge the loss of the Bourbon in Spain. Für der Kaiser und der Vaterland! The French, even before we went to war with the Soviets, was preparing for a war with us. Building fortifications in Alsace-Lorraine, they have created a new Maginot Line. However, it's still just as easy to go around it. It is almost beyond belief. Over a century and 10 years later, the dream of Imperial Germany is realized. The idea of a German-led European community can now be explored. The Reichspakt will safeguard Europe, tradition, and enlighten despotism. The strength of nations is only as strong as their sovereigns. A truly sovereign Europe, led by many sovereigns, is the best Europe. A bright Europe. A Europe ordained by God. The vanquishing of Russia, France, of Spain, of Britain, it is the end of all opposition here in this continent, the beginning of continental self-reliance. All the oil, steel, rare earth resources, and anything else we could ever need is right here at home on our shared continent. And as a community, no communist China, no communist America will ever threaten this hegemony. We are the center of the world, and we want for nothing. Hello everyone, thank you so much for 3,500 subscribers. It was a big goal to hit and a big goal to reach, and the fact that the numbers continue to grow so fast is incredible. I began just 7 months ago. My first video was a short, non-narrative based Kaiser restoration TFR video just like this one. And I needed to revisit it and right the wrong that it was a non-narrative video. The path deserves more, and you deserved more, and now you have it. And the amount of positive reception and kind words I've received are beyond what I could have ever imagined. You see thank yous in text from me, but you don't hear them like this, so let me personally, especially, thank you. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.